Muchas gracias. Favor de tomar asiento. En nombre de la Universidad Anáhuac, México, damos a ustedes la más cordial bienvenida a la conferencia magistral La ley y la ética ante los retos de la sociedad actual, una perspectiva judía. A continuación presentaremos a los miembros del Presidium. La vicerrectora académica de la Universidad Anáhuac, México, doctora Sonia Barnech Frías. Nuestro conferencista magistral, Rabino Lord Jonathan Sacks. El director de la Facultad de Humanidades, Filosofía y Letras, maestro Carlos Lepe Pineda. Asimismo, queremos dar la bienvenida a los distinguidos invitados especiales que nos acompañan. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Solicitamos de la manera más atenta a la doctora Sonia Barnech Frías, vicerrectora académica de nuestra universidad, nos presente la semblanza curricular de nuestro invitado.
Muy buenas tardes, tengan todos ustedes. Líder religioso internacional, filósofo, ganador de premios y voz moral reconocida y respetada, el rabino Lord Jonathan Sacks obtuvo el premio Templeton en reconocimiento a sus excepcionales contribuciones a la afirmación de la dimensión espiritual de la vida. Fue descrito por el príncipe de Gales como una luz para la nación y el primer ministro inglés Tony Blair le llamó un gigante intelectual. Es una referencia obligada y frecuente en la radio, la televisión y la prensa en Inglaterra y en el resto del mundo. Desde su nombramiento como rabino jefe de la United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth, cargo que desempeñó por 22 años entre 1991 y 2013, el rabino Sacks tuvo varios reconocimientos académicos en distintas instituciones, tales como la Yeshiva University y el King's College de Londres. Actualmente es profesor global distinguido por Ingeborg e Ira Rennert en la Universidad de Nueva York. El rabino Sacks ha sido reconocido con 17 doctorados honoris causa, incluyendo el Doctor of Divinity conferido por el arzobispo de Canterbury, Lord Carey, en ocasión de sus 10 años como rabino jefe. Nuestro invitado de honor es autor de más de 30 libros. Además, publicó una nueva traducción comentada en inglés del Koren Sacks Sidur, el primer Sidur ortodoxo en una generación. Su más reciente trabajo, Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence, obtuvo el National Jewish Book Award en los Estados Unidos en 2015 y estuvo en el top 10 de los libros más vendidos según el Sunday Times del Reino Unido. Sus conversaciones y comentarios a la Torá son leídos en las comunidades judías por todo el mundo. En reconocimiento a su trabajo, el rabino Sacks ha sido merecedor, entre otros premios, del Premio Jerusalén en 1995 por sus contribuciones a la vida judía de la diáspora. Recibió también the Ladislaus Last Ecumenical and Social Concern Award de la Universidad Ben Gurión de Israel en 2011 y, entre muchos otros, the Katz Award en reconocimiento a sus contribuciones por el análisis y aplicación del halajá en la vida moderna en Israel en 2014. Recibió la medalla de Becket Funds 2014 en Canterbury por su defensa de la libertad religiosa en la esfera pública y ganó el Bradley Prize en reconocimiento por ser una voz moral líder en el mundo actual. El rabino Sacks fue nombrado caballero por la reina de Inglaterra en 2005 y ocupa un lugar en la Casa de los Lores desde octubre de 2009. En síntesis, el rabino Lord Jonathan Sacks es uno de los más importantes y destacados líderes judíos de nuestra era. Un gran guía espiritual, pensador, filósofo, escritor y orador. Sus libros, sus artículos, sus conferencias, sus discursos y sus apariciones en foros públicos en todo el mundo, ampliamente difundidos en los medios y las redes sociales, son invaluables joyas. Es un privilegio para nuestra universidad tener la oportunidad de recibirlo y el privilegio de escucharlo. Bienvenido a la Universidad Anáhuac, México. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, doctora Barnett. Sin más preámbulos, dejamos los micrófonos al rabino Lord Jonathan Sacks para que nos imparta la conferencia La ley y la ética ante los retos de la sociedad actual, una perspectiva judía.
Vice Rector, beloved friends, I hope this comes across in translation. May I thank the translator actually, because the Spanish-English translation was brilliant. But I must tell you, if you're going to receive a compliment, it sounds so much better in Spanish than in English. I deem it an enormous privilege to be able to address you in this wonderful university, Anáhuac, which, to my mind, has the most beautiful motto of any university I have ever visited. Its motto is to defeat evil with good, and I think that is the message for the 21st century. There is so much evil out there in the world that we need to join forces to deliver the good that will bring us together instead of splitting us apart. I love the relationship the Jewish community has with this university and with Mexico as a whole. And as I was telling your rector, I wondered what it was about Mexico that made relationships so good, and I suddenly realized you have so much more light and warmth in Mexico than we have in England. We do dark and cold very well, but here there is light and warmth and love, and I thank you for that. Friends, I want to add one thing. In a world of religiously driven violence, in a world of division and anger and hate and terror, what is the symbol of hope that keeps me working day after day, and I'm sure keeps all of us? And the answer goes back to a meeting in 1961 between a very special Pope, John the 23rd, and a French Jewish historian, Jules Isaac. They met because the Pope had read some of Isaac's work about the history of anti-Semitism. And Pope John Paul decided there must be a change. That two communities so ancient and so blessed, that had lived for 17 centuries in estrangement and suspicion, should come together as respected and cherished friends. It was then that the Pope set in motion the process, he didn't live to see it completed, called Vatican II, which issued the great document Nostra Aetate, which completely transformed the relationship between Catholics and Jews throughout the world. Today, we meet as friends, we work together. It's been my privilege to know both Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis. Pope Benedict in the Vatican and being in Pope Francis's company in the Vatican. And that friendship is a sign of hope, not just for us, but for the world. So let me begin with a fascinating passage in a book by the Harvard historian Niall Ferguson. In his book called Civilization, he quotes a member of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. The Chinese set up an academy to study why it was that China, having led the West in every field, in technology and many other fields, until the 17th century, suddenly fell behind the West. What was it about the West that gave it its advantage over the great civilization of China? And this is what the Academy found. At first they said, we thought it was your guns. You had better weapons than we had. Then we studied a bit deeper and we decided it was your political structure. You had democracy and we didn't, and that's how you got the guns. Then we studied further and we decided it was your economy. It was the market economy that gave you democracy, that gave you the guns. But for the last 20 years, we have been in no doubt. What gave you the advantage over us was your religion. Fascinating statement coming from China. In other words, it was that thing that we call the Judeo-Christian ethic that gave the West its critical edge. Of course, you wouldn't find somebody in the West saying that today. But China saw it and understood it. Now, I want to ask today, what features of the Judeo-Christian ethic, the ethic that we share, that made the West so special, that gave us the market economy, that gave us democracy, that gave us the ability to grow? I do not argue with the statement attributed to Dostoevsky that if God does not exist, all is permitted. I think there are people who are not religious at all, or not religious in our sense, who have been good people. The Greeks, following the teachings of Plato, or Aristotle, or the Stoics. The Chinese, following the traditions of Taoism and Confucianism, Hindu ethics, and so on. There are ethical systems that do not depend on religion in the Judeo-Christian sense. In fact, scientists now have been asking what is the biological basis of morality. You know the famous story of two explorers in the jungle, and they hear a lion roar. And the first one searches for a place where both of them can find safety. And the second one starts putting on his running shoes. And the first says to the second, "Why are you putting on your running shoes? You can't run faster than the lion." And the second replies, "I don't need to run faster than the lion. I just need to run faster than you." So you understand from that joke the Darwinian imperative. If the thing that drives us biologically is survival, then we are not going to be moral, we are going to be selfish, egoistic. We're concerned with our own survival. And it was this that gave Charles Darwin his biggest doubt. It made him feel that somehow he'd got everything wrong. Because if Darwin's theory of natural selection says everyone aims at their survival, and survival makes us ruthless and selfish, not moral, how is it that every society that Charles Darwin ever knew about valued altruism, idealism, people who made sacrifices for others? And that was Darwin's problem, which eventually he solved in his later book, The Descent of Man. However, we can now give a bit of detail to that. The first detail is given by somebody called J.B.S. Haldane, a scientist who would ask, would you, a rationalist, jump into the river to save your brother? To which he replied, no, but I jump into the river to save 2 brothers or 8 cousins. I don't know if you can work that out. We share 50% of our genes with a brother, and 1/8, 12.5% with cousins. So if you save 2 brothers or 8 cousins, even if you die in the effort, you have still handed on your genes to the next generation. That is the basic, most minimal structure of altruism. It's called kin selection. We make sacrifices to people who are closely related to us genetically. That's the first step. The second step, however, takes us a bit further, and it's called reciprocal altruism. Reciprocal altruism tells us that somebody will make sacrifices for the sake of others if that person knows that at a later date others will make sacrifices for them. Even fruit bats do this. Social animals do it. When they find food, they share it with others because they will know there will come a time when they won't find food and they will depend on others sharing it with them. So that widens our altruism beyond our immediate family to the group. However, reciprocal altruism requires a lot of memory space. In days before iPhones, we've delegated our memories to our phones, as you know, but in the days when we didn't have these big memories, you have to remember who could you rely on in the past? And that sets a limit to group size. And there is an Oxford anthropologist called Robin Dunbar who worked out the relationship between the size of brain of a given animal and the optimum size of the group. We have much bigger brains than any other animal, so humans are the most social of all animals. And the maximum size, Dunbar came to the conclusion, where we can remember how people have acted to us in the past, is 150. Does that make sense to you? Schools where they have 150 pupils each year, everyone knows everyone else. But bigger than that, they don't. So the biggest size of a group bound together by reciprocal altruism is 150, which worked so long as people lived in villages. The big problem came when they began to move into towns and cities. That was the problem. How do you establish a relationship of trust between strangers? And that is when morality was born. It's when religions were born in the formal way, with temples and priests and rituals. So religion solved the problem of trust between strangers. But it needn't be a religion like Judaism or Christianity. It could be a religion without God, based on a highly hierarchical society. And that's basically what happened in China, for instance. You had belief in the social structure, not in something beyond it. So if you have no religion at all, you will still behave well to your family, I hope, if you've got a nice family like we all have, and you will act well towards 150 of your friends, and if you belong to a wider group, you'll have some moral system. And those things are universal. Justice is universal. Have you ever seen, what is the first thing a child says when somebody else has a toy that he or she doesn't have? It's not fair, right? Isn't that the first thing they say? Even a 4-year-old child knows the principles of justice. They didn't read John Rawls or Robert Nozick. They didn't do political theory at Harvard, but they know about justice. So those things are universal. But the details, the rich texture, varies from culture to culture. And that is what I want to look at now. What made the Judeo-Christian ethic different from all other cultures? And I want to identify 7 elements that I think are central. The first one is the unprecedented dignity given to every single human being, regardless of color or culture or creed or class. Let us make man in our image according to our likeness, says Genesis 1. And that is any man, any woman. The idea that a human being could be in the image of God was not new to the Bible. Lots of people believed it. But who was in the image of God? The ruler, the Pharaoh, the king of the Mesopotamian city-state. Ramses means, Ramses the Great, Ramses II, the great Pharaoh of Egypt. Ramses means child of the sun god. So one person could be in the image of God. The idea that we're all in the image of God, that is completely new to the Hebrew Bible and part of what makes the Judeo-Christian ethic very distinctive. That's the first one. The second one is the emphasis on human freedom. This flows from Abrahamic monotheism and is very difficult to explain otherwise. You see, in the ancient world, the gods were, what were the gods? The god of the sun, the moon, the stars, the sea, the ocean, the wind, the storm. They were all forces of nature. They weren't free, they were part of nature. Along comes the Bible and imagines a God who is completely beyond nature, who created nature as an act of free will. And when he made each of us in our image, he gave us freedom as well. I have to say that was probably not a smart move, because what did we do without freedom? Adam and Eve at the forbidden fruit, Cain and Abel, the first murder, and so on. And of course, the first thing human beings do is they try and deny their freedom. When God said to Adam, "What have you done?" He said, "What have I done? It was the woman. Blame her. It was her fault, not mine. Woman, what have you done? Blame the serpent." You know, please, sir, it wasn't me. You know that? So there's a denial of responsibility. Cain, am I my brother's keeper? But God says, no. You are free, you have choice, and therefore you have responsibility. And that creates this new concept of what we call retributive justice. That we are responsible for the wrong we do, and therefore, somehow or other, we must restore the moral balance of the universe. And that is very much central to the Bible. Third, the central principle of God's covenant with Noah after the flood. Do you know what a chiasmus is? You know, it's what I call mirror image symmetry, A, B, C, C, B, A. There is a perfect chiasmus in Genesis 9, verse 6. He who sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. This concept of perfect mirror image. What you do is what will be done to you. Therefore, do what you wish others to do to you. That is the basis of and then it adds, for in the image of God, God created man. Human life becomes sacred. In the beautiful words of the sages, one life is like a universe. Destroy a life and you destroy a universe. Save a life and you save a universe. The sanctity of life is another new and radical departure born in Judaism and Christianity, not shared at all by the ancient world or by the Hellenistic world. Fourth, here's a difficult idea. And I can explain this by way of a simple story. After Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Americans realized They were going to have to go to war with a country and a culture, Japan, that they didn't understand. It's a very important realization when you realize that the first thing you have to do is understand your enemies. Very important. So what they did was they turned to an anthropologist whose name was Ruth Benedict. And they said to Ruth Benedict, Ruth, explain the Japanese to us. And she did so, and her work was published after the war, called The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. And in it she explains the difference between a guilt culture and a shame culture. We in the West, we in the Judeo-Christian heritage have a guilt culture. Anyone who has a Jewish mother knows what is a guilt culture. Whereas in the East, in Japan, for instance, they have a shame culture. You know, and or to put it in positive terms, the Jewish Christian culture is a righteousness culture, whereas the Japanese culture is an honor culture. These are different things. And the interesting thing is that the Bible brought into being this thing called the guilt culture. Let me explain something. My professor in philosophy, his name was Sir Bernard Williams, pointed out once that a shame culture is a visual culture, because you feel shame when you imagine other people seeing you doing what you shouldn't do. Yeah? So if you live in a shame culture and you're caught out, the first thing you want to do is to become invisible or to disappear somewhere. Whereas in a guilt culture, becoming invisible doesn't help at all, because the inner voice goes with you whether anyone can see you or not. And I now want to explain, if I may, the story of Adam and Eve in a way that I think you perhaps have not had it explained before. We think, what is this Adam and Eve about? It's about many things. I want to show you the key words in the Adam and Eve story. You remember the first thing the serpent does is he says, when you eat the fruit, your eyes will be opened. Were they blind before? Are you with me? You'll suddenly see. Do you remember what happened before they ate the fruit? They were naked and they were not ashamed. The key word there used is shame. Do you remember when Adam hears God, the sound of God walking in the garden, he hides. Now you can't hide from God, but you can hide. If you're living in a visual world, you can become invisible. Are you with me? The sin of Adam and Eve was that they chose a shame culture instead of a guilt culture. They preferred what they saw to what they heard, God's command. Are you with me? So that, I think, is what the story of Adam and Eve is about. It's about this novelty that in a world of shame, the Bible introduces the concept of guilt. The thing you listen to. You understand the basic innovation of the Hebrew Bible is God is someone you can't see. The key word of the Hebrew Bible, not that you read this in translation, but the key word is Shema, hear. It's not something you see. If you've ever seen Jews say the words Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, you will see they cover their eyes. Why? Because they are opting out of the visual and listening instead. That's the essence of Judaism, a culture of the ear, not a culture of the eye. The classic culture of the eye was ancient Greece. Everything about Greece was visual. The great architecture, the great art, the Olympic Games, a spectacle. The word idea in English is the same as the word video. You know, an idea is something you see. Plato holds the truth is something you see once you come out of the cave and you are standing in sunlight. Greek culture is totally visual. It's a culture of honor and shame. Whereas Judaism was a culture that was anti or aniconic. God cannot be seen, and therefore don't try and represent him by anything that can be seen. Now, one fundamental difference between a shame culture and a guilt culture is that a shame culture, if you do wrong, it's like a stain that is visible, that wherever you go, you feel people seeing this stain on your person. There's no way out. So, in English novels of the 19th century, if somebody got shamed, they went away to Australia. In Japan, to this day, if a company has done badly, the CEO may commit suicide. Why? Because he is shamed, and by committing suicide, he restores honor. In a shame culture, once you've been found out, there's no way back. But a guilt culture makes a fundamental distinction. We take it for granted. We shouldn't take it for granted. Between the act and the person. The act was wrong, but the person is redeemable. And therefore, once you have a guilt culture, you begin to have concepts of repentance and forgiveness. All cultures have a concept of appeasement. All cultures have conflict resolution procedures, but only Judeo-Christian cultures have the concept of repentance and forgiveness. So that is the fourth idea. With guilt comes forgiveness. And that is fundamental. The act is wrong, but you dissociate, you distance yourself from the act, then you are forgiven. The fifth is an interesting one. Abrahamic monotheism was supposed to bring monotheism to replace idolatry. Tell me, is there any critique of idolatry in the book of Genesis? I can't think of any. I can't think of any at all, actually. Maybe a little bit. Rachel steals her father's little figurines, but what is the drama that gets enacted again and again and again in Genesis? 6 times by my count, maybe more. Whenever a member of the covenantal family steps out of home space, they meet a society of sexual free-for-all. Twice, Abraham asks Sarah, please pretend to be my sister, not my wife, because if they think you're my wife, they're going to kill me, because they want to take you into the harem. Isaac has to do so with Rebekah. 2 angels come to visit Lot in the town of Sodom. The entire city surrounds them and says, bring them out, for an act of homosexual rape. Dinah goes out to visit the people of Shechem and is raped and abducted by the local prince. Joseph, in Potiphar's household, Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him. This is a standard Hollywood soap opera moment, you know? And so wherever you go, you find a society without a sexual ethic. And that is the argument of Genesis, not against idolatry. Now, why is that? I don't know how this works in Spanish, but I know how it works in English. The word faith is usually associated with something cognitive. It's what I believe, yeah? That's what faith in English usually means. But the word emunah in Hebrew means what we call in English faithful. When you're married, you are faithful to your husband and or wife. You don't have relations with anyone else. Fidelity. That's what it's about. And that is why in Judaism, the key human counterpart of faith in God is faithfulness to your marriage partner. And that's why the Hebrew Bible constantly compares the relationship of us to God to that within the family. Either it is God's love for us is like the love of a father for a child, or in the case of Isaiah, a mother for a child, or, as Hosea says, it's the love of a husband and wife. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and judgment, etc., etc. So in Judaism, sexual ethics is really important, because if we are to be faithful to God, we have to be faithful to one another. And if we are to be faithful to our covenant with God, we have to be faithful to that covenant called marriage. That's number 5. 6. Covenant is the basis of society. At Mount Sinai, the Israelites pledged themselves to God, we'll be responsible to you and we'll be responsible for one another. And that became a key word in Europe, because covenant in all Calvinist countries, first Switzerland, then Holland, then Scotland, then England, then the Pilgrim Fathers to the United States, that was their key concept. We are a society bound together by covenant. And 7th, which is absolutely fundamental, is that in the Bible, right is more important than might. In the ancient world, all the gods that people worshipped were powers. Why did you worship them? Because they were stronger than you are. Yes, God is stronger than we are, but that's not the point. God is the God of justice. Right takes priority over might. Those are the 7 ideas that Judaism and Christianity gave to the world. And now I want to say this. In Mexico, you're still religious. In Europe, we aren't. We're losing it. And when we lose our faith, people think life will go on as normal. Only people won't go to church or synagogue. It won't. Because our whole culture was built on these 7 fundamental principles that only exist in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the tradition of the Bible. So all 7 are today at risk. So let's begin with number 1, human dignity. We're in the image of God. What happened to that? All of a sudden we share 98% of our genome with chimpanzees. All of a sudden we are, as one biologist poetically put it, a gene's way of making another gene. We're just being used by genes to hand themselves on across the generation. Or has the work of Yuval Harari come to Mexico? According to Yuval Harari, we are an algorithm. I have no idea what an algorithm is. That's why we have grandchildren, you know. I'll explain it to you, grandpa. So that's what's become of us. The greater our powers, the lower our self-image. I've always said when people think of themselves as more than human, they land up as being less than human. Yuval Harari's question at the end of his 2nd book, Homo Deus, is, has humanity a future? Are we defined by our intelligence or by our consciousness? Because if it's intelligence, we've already lost. We've created machines that are smarter than us. We are losing human dignity. Number 2, we are losing human freedom. Every neuroscientist I know, and most scientists I know, believe that free will is a complete illusion. We are genetically determined. We're determined by our DNA, by our neuroscience, and so on. I once invited the Oxford professor of neuroscience, Colin Blakemore, to take part in a program I was doing. I was doing a lot of conversations with atheists, and he is what we call a hard determinist. He believes we have no choice at all. I said, I'm glad, Colin, you hold that, because that meant you had no choice but to be on my television program. And I have no choice but to argue better than you. So, I mean, this is a crazy business. I don't know if you realize the contradiction at the heart of contemporary secular culture. Everyone's saying morality is whatever you choose it to be. We should be free to choose whatever we want. And at the same time, scientists are telling us there's no such thing as freedom of choice. So we are moving into an arena where we're losing the concept of human freedom. And a lot of stuff is going to happen when that happens. If we do not believe in freedom, then we don't believe in moral responsibility. I said to Colin Blakemore, if what you say is true, then we shouldn't have police and courts of justice and prisons. Instead, we should simply catch people doing things we don't like and perform brain surgery on them. Or at least give them, drug treatment. Forget anything else, because it wasn't their fault. You said, I can understand in totalitarian countries they might want to do that. That was quite wrong. If we have no individual freedom, there's no reason to want a free society. That, too, we are losing. 3, we will lose the concept of the sanctity of life. Well, we've already lost it in the case of the beginning of life, abortion. But we will lose it at the end of life, likewise. We will call it assisted suicide, voluntary euthanasia, will, I guarantee you, sweep the West, because without the Judeo-Christian faith, there's no reason to believe that life is sacred. Number 4, are we still in a guilt morality? Are you on social media? Have you been seeing what happens to Hollywood film producers, etc. these days? We are living in an absolute shame culture. People are shamed today on the social media. Forget about establishing, are they repentant? Do we forgive them? Forget it. It's shame. Guilt has disappeared and shame has taken its place. And so we're seeing basically the morality of the lynch mob. And this is dangerous, but it is happening throughout the West. Number 5, what happens when you lose the concept of the sanctity of marriage? You lose the integrity of the family. Today in Britain and in the United States, fewer people than ever are getting married. They're getting married later than ever. 48% of children in Britain are born outside of marriage. And what is the result of that? The result is we have today in Britain 3.5 million children living in poverty, in the middle of an affluent society, because the surest route out of poverty is to have a solid family. If in the end, usually the woman is left to carry the double burden of looking after the family and earning an income, and the man just walks scot-free. This is great for men, I tell you, it's terrific. But for women and children, it is horrific. So we're losing the integrity of the family. 6, we are losing the covenantal basis of society. Today, the richest 1% earn 82% of the wealth. And the trouble is, that might have been okay if they felt responsible for everyone else and they had to give back. But today, if you're wealthy, you live in a gilded, gated ghetto, and you try not to look at the people who don't have what you have. And then society has become very deeply divided. Lose the covenant, the social divisions grow and eventually become intolerable. And sixthly, we always had, do you remember this concept of the moral limits of power, that right and might are different things, or morality and politics are different things, mutually influencing? Today, certainly in America and Britain, people have stopped thinking about morality anymore, and they only talk about politics. I have a right to do this, right? There's a big difference between I have a right to do this, which is a political statement, and I am right to do this, which is a moral statement. Today, people don't make moral statements. All the statements, people are concerned with issues. Climate change, income inequality, but these are all for politics to deal with. And what are we supposed to deal with as moral beings? Oh, forget it. So we are losing that vital area called morality. So we are seeing that any society that loses the Judeo-Christian ethic slowly and imperceptibly, invisibly, will lose those 7 elements that made the West the success it was, that gave it the market economy, that gave it democracy, that gave it human rights, that gave it all the beautiful things we have come to know. So I say that the Bible remains the single most important text for the 21st century. Because if we lose that Bible, we will be condemned to be one of Yuval Harari's algorithms. Only we are iPhone 6 instead of iPhone 10, and who wants an iPhone 6 when you can have an iPhone 10? And so we will slowly disappear in favor of these machines we've created, and we will have lost what made us special. So I do urge, consider the Bible a text not from the past and for the past, but a text for the future of our humanity. I may have sounded a tiny bit pessimistic, so therefore let me end on a more optimistic note, or a more hopeful note. These are 2 different things. But don't forget, the prophets, even though they warned, were always prophets of hope. And I want to tell you how I acquired my personal tutor in hope. It happened about 15 years ago. I acquired for the first time in our car something called a satellite navigation system. You have this today in Google Maps. In those days, it was something very new and very special. And I was thrilled by this new technology. You know, you key in where you want to go, and a very polite lady tells you exactly where to go. And when I first acquired this, I realized that whoever designed this machine had never met a Jewish driver. Because you tell a computer where you want to go, and this nice lady says you go straight for 300 yards and then you turn left. And a Jewish driver says, what does she know? I've been living here for 60 years. I know you go 300 yards and you turn right.